I remember the exact moment the universe stopped making sense, not in a cosmic theoretical way, but in the intimate, terrifying chaos of my own living room. It wasn't a supernova or the collision of galaxies, it was just a laptop screen glowing cold and indifferent on a Tuesday evening. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To truly understand the rupture, you need to understand the quiet, meticulously ordered world that existed before. My world, our world. I am Arthur Finch, or rather I was Arthur Finch, a name that once brought to mind an astrophysicist, someone whose life was mapped out in equations and the silent dance of distant stars. My days were spent in the hushed halls of a prestigious research institution in Washington, D.C., deciphering the universe's most complex secrets. My nights, or what was left of them after the stars called, were spent with Victoria. She was my anchor, or so I believed, in the swirling human currents I found so bewildering. Our life together was a tapestry woven with quiet evenings, shared books, and the comfortable rhythm of two people who understood each other's unspoken thoughts. She, the vivacious political consultant, a whirlwind of energy and charm, and I, the introverted stargazer, found an unlikely harmony. I was 46, she a few years younger, and the space between us felt solid, immutable. My world, I can say now with the bitter clarity of hindsight, revolved around the celestial calculations of the cosmos and the comforting, unwavering presence of Victoria. I met Victoria at a university fundraiser, a place I usually only attended out of obligation. Feeling like a misplaced comet in a room full of brightly burning but ultimately transient social stars, she was different. She didn't just make small talk. She asked about my research, not just with polite curiosity, but with genuine incisive questions. Her eyes, a striking shade of hazel, sparkled with an intelligent energy that immediately captivated my usually reserved self. I remember explaining the concept of dark matter, my voice gaining an unusual warmth as I described the unseen forces shaping galaxies, and she listened, utterly absorbed, occasionally interjecting with an insightful analogy from her own field. She had a way of making me feel seen, understood, not just as the eccentric professor lost in the stars, but as Arthur, a man with thoughts and passions. Our courtship was swift, a surprising acceleration for someone of my cautious nature. She swept me up in her vibrancy, pulling me out of my academic shell. She dragged me to art galleries, to political debates I would never have considered attending, and somehow I found myself enjoying them, illuminated by her infectious enthusiasm. She loved my quiet intensity, she said. My profound depth. She made me feel interesting, valuable, not just for my mind, but for me. Looking back, I recall small things, barely whispers then, that might have been harbingers. Her almost theatrical ease with everyone, effortlessly charming. A flash of something in her eyes sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. A flicker of calculation that I dismissed as mere professional acuity. Or the way she would gently steer conversations away from topics she found less engaging, always with a smile, a touch on my arm, making me feel like I was the one being obtuse for even suggesting them. I remember once she casually corrected a detail I shared about my childhood, something insignificant, but I was certain of my memory. She laughed it off, saying I must have misremembered, that her version sounded much more charming for a story. I let it go, smiling at her playful insistence. It felt harmless then, a playful revision of reality. The first significant shift, a tremor beneath the bedrock of our predictable life, began subtly. Victoria's career as a political consultant was on an upward trajectory. New campaigns, more prominent clients, longer hours. She started talking about a new campaign manager, Daniel, a younger man, ambitious and relentless. A necessary evil, she'd often say with a wry smile, but brilliant at what he does. He was crucial for her latest, most high-stakes project. I, immersed in my own cosmic calculations, initially accepted her explanations without question. My trust in her was absolute, a fundamental constant in my universe. The late-night strategy sessions became more frequent. Her phone, once something she used openly, now often face down on the table, its screen dark. She'd arrive home, sometimes well past midnight, smelling faintly of something unfamiliar. Not just the city grime, but a cloying sweetness, like cheap cologne mixed with an expensive perfume. My inquiries about her day, initially met with animated stories of political maneuvering, gradually became terse. It was a bloodbath, Arthur, she'd sigh, rubbing her temples. You wouldn't understand the pressures. Or, don't worry your brilliant head about it, darling. Just another day in the trenches. I remember one evening I prepared her favorite meal, a quiet gesture of support. She arrived home exhausted, or so she said, and barely picked at it. I tried to talk to her, to connect, to simply be with her. I asked about Daniel, wondering if he was making her life particularly difficult. Her jaw tightened. "He's demanding, yes, but effective," she said, her voice clipped. "Why the sudden interest in my professional adversaries?" She made it sound like I was prying, like my concern was an intrusion. I retreated, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. She would often comment on my sweet naivety, saying it was endearing but sometimes made me a bit out of touch with the realities of her cutthroat world. I started to wonder if I was being too sensitive, too demanding of her precious time and energy. Perhaps I was indeed too much of an academic, too sheltered from the harsh realities of the world outside the observatory. My self-doubt began to take root, small and insidious. The psychological pressure mounted without me even realizing it. Conversations became minefields. If I expressed a concern, however gently, it was met with a sigh, a roll of her eyes, or a passive-aggressive remark about my inability to understand the real world. Once I mentioned feeling a bit lonely, how I missed our quiet evenings. She turned from the mirror, mid-makeup application, her gaze chilling. "Arthur, are you suggesting my career isn't important? Are you trying to hold me back? I thought you were a man who supported women's ambition." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My intention, born of love and longing, had been twisted into something selfish and misogynistic. I stammered, apologized profusely, feeling a profound shame wash over me. I swore to myself I would never bring it up again. I started to believe that I was indeed being unreasonable, that my needs were secondary, petty compared to the grand, important struggles of her political campaigns. I began to second-guess my own feelings, my own memories of how things used to be. Had I always been so needy? Had I always been so oblivious to the demands of a high-powered career? She had a way of subtly reframing our past, making it seem like I was the one who had changed, that my expectations were the ones that had grown unrealistic. The key moment, the fulcrum point where my reality truly began to fracture, arrived with an almost theatrical cruelty. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing unraveling, like a star collapsing under its own gravity. Victoria's laptop, her indispensable tool of war, had developed an irritating glitch. She tossed it onto my desk one evening, an exasperated sigh escaping her lips. "Fix it, Arthur, please. I have a major presentation tomorrow, and it's acting like a petulant child." She knew my aptitude for technical problems, a handy skill for an astrophysicist who often wrestled with complex instruments. I didn't mind. I welcomed the small task, a chance to feel useful, to quietly contribute to her important work. I started troubleshooting, my mind still half-occupied with the elegant dance of binary stars. I ran diagnostics, checked for malware, and then, while delving into system files, I noticed something odd. A hidden partition. It wasn't encrypted, just cleverly concealed, designed to be invisible to a casual user. My technical curiosity, a primal instinct for me, kicked in. I clicked. The folders that opened were innocuous at first glance: campaign data, client profiles, media strategy. But then, nested deep within, campaign data 2023 under a subfolder cryptically named personal reflections. I saw it. Files with names like Daniel_late night, V&D_after hours, Arthur's blinders. My breath caught. My fingers, usually so precise, trembled as they hovered over the trackpad. A cold dread, a premonition of something unspeakably wrong, seeped into my bones. I clicked on V&D_after hours. The first video loaded. It was poorly lit, grainy, shot from a phone, but clear enough. Victoria, my wife, my anchor, laughing, her head thrown back. A different kind of laughter than I had ever heard from her. A raw, uninhibited sound. And then Daniel, his face close to hers, whispering something I couldn't quite make out, but the intimacy of their posture, the way her fingers were entwined in his hair, it was unmistakable. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat a painful thud of disbelief. I watched, compelled by a morbid fascination, as video after video played out, each one a gut punch. There was my wife, my Victoria, in scenarios I couldn't even fathom. The stolen glances, the shared jokes, the passionate kisses, the whispers. And then the messages, text exchanges, hundreds of them, dated over months, some even stretching back to almost a year ago. It wasn't just physical betrayal. That in itself would have been devastating enough. No, this was far more insidious, more soul-crushing. I scrolled, my vision blurring, my mind struggling to reconcile the woman on the screen, the words on the page, with the woman who slept beside me every night. "Daniel, your husband really has no clue, does he?" Victoria: "He's brilliant with stars, darling, but utterly blind to the real world. His naivety is almost sweet. And predictable. So very predictable. Predictable. Boring. Naive. The words echoed in the silent room, each one a hammer blow to the very foundation of my being. They weren't just having an affair, they were mocking me, deriding the very qualities she once claimed to love. My quiet nature, my intellectual pursuits, my unwavering trust, all of it had been dissected, ridiculed, and presented as evidence of my pathetic cluelessness. She had woven a narrative of my character, not just for Daniel, but for herself, to justify her actions, to diminish me. The necessary evil was not Daniel for her career. I was the necessary evil, the convenient, dull husband who allowed her to pursue her real desires. Unburdened by guilt, my carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million glittering razor-sharp shards. My stomach lurched. A wave of nausea, cold and visceral, swept over me. I clamped a hand over my mouth, suppressing a sob that clawed at my throat. My vision swam, not from tears, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of reality crashing down. The air felt thin, suffocating. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the screen, the incriminating evidence burning itself into my retina. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, a fine tremor that started in my hands and spread through my chest, making my teeth chatter. It was a coldness that seeped into my bones, colder than any deep space void I had ever contemplated. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, dissolved into a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a profound aching despair. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt constricted, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. The room, our home, suddenly felt alien, imbued with a sinister energy. Every object, every photograph, every shared memory became tainted, a cruel joke played on me. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the screen, watching the digital ghosts of their betrayal. Hours, perhaps. The city outside went from twilight to full night, the streetlights cast in long, indifferent shadows. When Victoria eventually came home, hours later, her footsteps light and breezy on the stairs, I was still there, the laptop still open. I heard her key in the lock, her cheerful call. "Arthur, darling, are you still up?" My mouth felt like sandpaper. My voice, when I tried to speak, was just a rasp lost in my throat. I didn't confront her then. The words wouldn't come. What could I say that those videos and messages hadn't already screamed? The enormity of it, the depth of her deception, the sheer cruelty of it paralyzed me. I simply closed the laptop, my fingers numb against the cold metal, and walked away. I walked past her, barely registering her startled look, and went straight to our bedroom. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a blank canvas suddenly filled with the searing images from the screen. Sleep was impossible. My brain replayed snippets of conversations, her exhaustion, her important meetings, her dismissive comments about my naivety, each one now laced with the venom of her true feelings. I felt like a fool, an absolute monumental fool, not just for being cuckolded, but for having my very identity, my quiet essence, dissected and mocked. The next few days were a blur of dissociation. I went to work, sat in my office, but I saw nothing, heard nothing. The complex equations on my whiteboard seemed like gibberish. The vastness of space suddenly felt claustrophobic, mirroring the constriction in my chest. I couldn't eat. The mere thought of food made my stomach revolt. I lost weight rapidly, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. My colleagues must have noticed, but my naturally reserved nature meant they likely attributed it to a particularly intense research period. They knew I often lost myself in my work. Little did they know I was lost in a different kind of void. Victoria, surprisingly, seemed to be walking on eggshells. She would ask if I was all right, if I was just stressed. Her touch felt repulsive. Her voice, once so captivating, now grated on my ears. I couldn't look at her without seeing the images, hearing her mocking laughter. The lies, the manipulations had not just destroyed our relationship. They had fundamentally altered my perception of reality itself. Everything she had ever said, every gesture, every shared moment, was now suspect, re-evaluated through the lens of her betrayal. Had she ever truly loved me? Or was I just a convenient, predictable mark? The emotional collapse was profound, total. I stopped attending meetings, stopped responding to emails. I retreated into myself, unable to articulate the devastation. The grief was not just for the loss of a wife, but for the loss of an entire self-concept. The man who loved, trusted, and believed was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. My world, once so beautifully ordered, was now an entropic mess. All predictable patterns dissolved into chaos. Then, slowly, like a faint signal from a distant galaxy, an awakening began. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a gradual, painful accretion of understanding. I realized I couldn't go on living in that house, under that lie. The very air felt poisoned. My introverted nature, once a source of insecurity, now became my shield. I needed solitude, a place where I could process this cosmic horror without the noise of the world, without her presence. The decision to leave was not impulsive. It was a quiet, firm resolution born from the wreckage. I meticulously planned my exit. I took a sabbatical from the institution, citing personal reasons and burnout, which was, in its own way, true enough. I packed only the essentials, my most cherished books, some clothes, my old telescope, and the few photographs that didn't feature her. I left a short, unadorned note on the kitchen counter, addressed simply to Victoria. It said, "I know, I'm leaving. Don't try to find me." There was no anger, no accusations, just a cold, decisive finality. I couldn't bear to engage, to argue, to hear more lies. My silence was my only weapon, my only defense against further manipulation. I drove away from D.C. under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, the city lights receding in my rearview mirror like fading stars. I found a small, isolated cabin nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills. It was rustic, far from the polished elegance of our D.C. home, but it was perfect. Surrounded by ancient trees, the air crisp and clean, it offered the sanctuary I desperately needed. Here, under a canopy of stars untouched by city light pollution, I began the arduous process of rebuilding. The first few months were agonizing. I spent my days walking the winding forest paths, my nights under the boundless sky, staring through my telescope, not seeking answers, but seeking an emptiness that mirrored my own. I journaled incessantly, filling notebooks with raw, unedited despair. The anger came first, a white-hot rage that occasionally overwhelmed me, followed by waves of profound sadness that left me breathless and weeping. I relived every moment, every subtle slight, every dismissive comment, tracing the insidious path of her manipulation. I recognized the gaslighting, the emotional abuse, the way she had chipped away at my self-worth, until I was a pliable, trusting fool. The shame was immense, but slowly, through the act of writing, of articulating the betrayal, the shame began to transmute into a quiet understanding. I saw the patterns, not just in her actions, but in my own. My innate trust, my tendency to intellectualize emotions rather than feel them fully, my deep desire for harmony, these were qualities she had exploited. I realized that my love for her had been blind, not just to her flaws, but to the very real danger she posed to my inner peace. The stars became my silent confessors. I would sit for hours, telescope aimed at nebulae, at galaxies millions of light years away, and pour out my heart to the indifferent cosmos. There was a profound comfort in their vastness, in their cold, honest beauty. They offered no judgment, no platitudes, just an immutable presence. They reminded me of my own insignificance, yes, but also of the profound resilience of existence. If stars could die and be reborn, perhaps so could I. Gradually the journaling evolved. It started as a raw outpouring, then shifted to an analysis, a personal case study of human betrayal. I began to write, not just for myself, but with a nascent idea of forming a coherent narrative, a memoir. It wasn't about revenge or even about justice. It was about bearing witness, about understanding the universe within me, as complex and unpredictable as the universe above. I explored the vastness of betrayal, the gravitational pull of deceit, the echoes of a broken heart across the silent expanse of a shattered life. Writing it was a catharsis, a slow, methodical, surgical procedure on my own soul, excising the festering wounds. Months turned into almost a year. The gaunt, hollow-eyed man who arrived at the cabin was slowly replaced by someone new. Someone quieter, perhaps, but also stronger, more self-aware. The grief hadn't vanished entirely. It had simply changed shape, becoming a scar rather than an open wound. It was a reminder, a lesson etched into my very being. Eventually, the time came to return. Not to her, never to her, but to the life I had abandoned. I returned to D.C. a different man. My colleagues noted a change, a new gravitas in my demeanor. I was still Arthur Finch, the astrophysicist, still devoted to the cosmos. But my emotional universe had been profoundly realigned. I no longer sought validation in human connection, in the fickle, often deceptive realm of relationships. My gaze was firmly fixed on the cold, honest beauty of the cosmos. I still work at the institution, still teach, still pursue my research with the same quiet intensity. The cabin remains my sanctuary, a place I retreat to when the echoes of the city or of the past become too loud. I see Victoria sometimes, in the periphery of D.C.'s political circles, a polished, vivacious figure, still navigating her world of power and influence. She never tried to contact me, and I never looked back. There's no anger left, just a profound indifference, a quiet pity for someone so lost in the intricate web of her own deceptions. My heart is no longer fragile. It is resilient, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by solitude. I've found a different kind of fulfillment now, a deeper connection to the universal truths that transcend the transient dramas of human emotion. The stars, unchanging and eternal, are my confidants, my silent witnesses. My journey through the void of heartbreak led me to a new constellation within myself. A luminous understanding that some betrayals, however devastating, can ultimately illuminate a truer path. It's a bittersweet peace, a solitude born of pain, but it is unequivocally my own. And for an astrophysicist who once found solace only in the predictable laws of physics, this unpredictable journey has been the most profound discovery of all.